In the years when Germany dreamed of borderless skies, a creation was born in one of its factories that they would later try to forget. A machine made of rotten wood that was supposed to carry tanks through the air. A project where orders moved faster than thought, and fear proved stronger than metal. Engineers fought not the enemy, but the laws of physics. One takeoff, a miracle that almost killed its tug. One success that became a death sentence. Why did Hitler believe that wood could wage war with England? Why did a project that cost millions vanish under a secret classification? And what did the pilots see when the mammoth, finally took to the air? The answers lie in a history the Reich tried to erase from memory. The summer of 1940. The sky over the English Channel trembles with the roar of engines. The air vibrates with hundreds of Messerschmitts and Spitfires converging in head-on attacks. Below, the fields of England are turned into a burning canvas. Smoke rises above the clouds, the sun is extinguished in the fumes, and pilots, blinded by flashes, fight for a sky that already belongs to no one. Germany throws everything capable of taking to the air at the island. Fighters, dive bombers, bombers. But the greater the effort, the clearer it becomes that this is not a walk, but a war of attrition. Hitler still believes that England will fall, provided its air force is destroyed. Operation Sea Lion was supposed to be the prologue to the Great Invasion. German soldiers were already drawing arrows on maps leading to London, and Goering promised that the Royal Air Force would disappear in a matter of weeks. Everything looked simple. First bomb, then land troops. Thousands of paratroopers and gliders were to descend upon the coast like a storm. Aviation would replace artillery. Fire from the sky would sweep away any fortifications. English resistance seemed a pathetic obstacle, but the sky over Albion proved tougher than they thought in Berlin. The British held on to the last. Every airfield, every runway became an arena for a miraculous salvation. Their pilots, young and exhausted, rose into the sky again after every bombing. German aces, accustomed to easy victories, began to perish one by one. Goering, unwilling to admit collapse, ordered strikes on cities, hoping to break the enemy's morale. But instead of surrender, Britain grew more resolute. By autumn, it was clear. Air superiority hadn't been achieved, losses were mounting, and the effect was fading. In the headquarters, they no longer spoke of victory, only of how to save face. Goering assured the Führer that success was close, but deep down, he knew. England couldn't be taken with bombs. And then, when the dust had not yet settled on the ruins of London, German offices began to seek a new solution. Defeat in the sky didn't mean the end of the war. It merely forced them to look for a workaround. Hitler believed that if England couldn't be crushed from the air, it could be taken from an unexpected direction, a landing operation. But this required a weapon that didn't yet exist, a weapon capable of carrying heavy equipment, tanks, artillery, through the air, the things that turn war from a symbol of courage into the arithmetic of steel. Thus, deep within the Reich ministry, an idea was born that seemed madness even by the standards of the Third Reich, to create a flying machine capable of lifting 20 tons of cargo. Not just soldiers, but a tank. Not just a weapon, but an entire army in the air. It was meant to be a giant, capable of achieving the impossible, replacing the navy and artillery, connecting the sky and the earth in a single strike. While London was still smoking after the raids, a new assignment landed on the desk in Berlin. Its codename, Warsaw, concealed desperation. And although it was officially presented as an air invasion project, for those who read the papers between the lines, it was a gesture of fear. Germany understood it needed a miracle, and miracles in war often cost more than victories. Thus, the failure in the sky gave rise to a new madness on Earth, a project destined to be the strangest of all that were born in the heart of the Reich's war machine. And while hymns of resilience were sung in England and Germany, they were assembling blueprints for a machine capable of erasing cities without a single shot. The story of this design began with a defeat, but it would end much more quietly, not in fire, but in the shadow, where even the victors wouldn't want to remember that they once tried to make wood fly. Berlin refused to give up. Even when the Heavenly Front showed that the direct route to the island was closed, offices continued to look for back doors. If the Navy didn't guarantee success, if the sea was under the opponent's control, then they had to think differently. They thought of the sky as a bridge, not just a dream of bombs and fighters. An idea was born that contained both audacity and despair, an airborne landing that wouldn't be stopped by beaches and batteries. A landing that would deliver not only men to the coast, but also steel, mechanisms, fire. Military officials in Berlin were talking not about heroic dashes of individual units, but about the mechanics of conquest. Paratroopers, yes, they were fast and dangerous, but without heavy weapons, any attempt to establish a foothold turned into a farce. Infantry without guns was a target for armored vehicles and fortified positions. Sea delivery of heavy artillery remained vulnerable, and replacing it from the air sounded like a challenge to engineering logic. And then the idea that was initially discussed in whispers was born: a huge glider. Not just transport, but a carrier of tanks and self-propelled guns, a platform for ammunition and fuel, a mobile battery right on the landing line. The project was unofficially named Warsaw, a combination of hope and symbolism meant to accelerate progress. The meaning was simple. If the landing force could put a tank in the thick of the fighting, if artillery could be where there had previously only been rifles, then the usual defensive schemes would lose their meaning. This was no longer a demonstration of force, but an attempt to rewrite the physics of war. Steel and mass were to replace the sea and the shore, but ideas are one thing, realization another. Technicians and designers quickly outlined the problems. Where to get the materials? What loads could a wooden or steel structure withstand? How to ensure safe loading and unloading of heavy equipment? How to tow such a behemoth without destroying both the tug and the cargo? New questions arose. How many gliders were needed? What were the deadlines? Who would take responsibility for the first test? Politics began to exert pressure. Those at the top demanded results quickly, while those below spoke of factories already filled with orders for conventional equipment. The airborne concept changed the entire logic of the armed operation. It didn't just mean designing one glider, it meant establishing mass production on a scale the Germans had not previously undertaken for this type of machine. Manufacturers who before the war were associated with airplanes and light transport solutions now had to think like shipbuilders of the sky. The deadlines were incredibly tight, the tasks rigid, and the materials scarce. Each decision created a new limitation. A light fuselage meant less payload. A heavy frame required a different dolly, a different fleet of tugs. Nevertheless, decisions were made quickly. On paper, the scheme looked spectacular. 50 gliders, each with its unique cargo bay, each unit a bridge between the sky and the shore. But paper endures everything. Reality does not. The higher the pressure from above, the more compromises the designers were forced to make. And these compromises would later show that an idea born out of strategic necessity can crumble due to elementary technical limitations. When the project received official approval, German industry split into two camps. Two giants, Junkers and Messerschmitt, received the same assignment: build a heavy glider capable of lifting 20 tons of cargo. The deadline? A few weeks. The conditions were like a mad engineer's dream. Papers with orders flew faster than the ink could dry. No one discussed whether it was even possible. An order meant only one thing: do it. At the Junkers factory in Merseburg, Chief designer Hertel and his closest colleague, Gruppler, understood there was no turning back. The factory worked around the clock. The lights from the workshop windows never went out, even at night. Machines hummed, engineers slept right beside drawing boards. Blueprints were drawn on the back of old plans because there wasn't time for new sheets. People lived between coffee and panic, and the deadline seemed not just tight, but a mockery of common sense. Messerschmitt, in contrast, moved more confidently. They were allowed to use familiar technologies, steel tubes, fabric covering, what the company knew inside and out. The designers from Augsburg felt like favorites, and rumors circulated in the corridors that Göring was personally betting on the southern variant. Everything looked logical to them: minimum risk, maximum efficiency. But in Berlin, rules were dictated not by logic, but by ambition. Junkers received the strictest instruction to use only wood. This decision was explained by a shortage of metal, but in essence, it was a caprice of a system where politics intruded into engineering. The company had no experience with wooden structures, no stock of quality lumber. They didn't even have suitable adhesives. However, the order meant only one thing: all of this must appear immediately. The Ministry of Aviation assigned a new designation to the project. The Junkers variant was named Ju 322, Warsaw Ost, East. Messerschmitt's Mi 321, Warsaw, Süd, South. No one concealed that this was not just a competition between technical schools, but a battle for influence, for a place in Germany's future post-war sky. Göring observed the race with cold satisfaction. The fiercer the rivalry, the higher the tempo. With each passing day, the reporting became more desperate. Factories received directives directly from the Reich ministry. Procure materials immediately. Complete workshop preparation by the end of the week. Prototypes to be presented by November 1st. Design bureaus turned into idea factories where slogans were written on boards instead of formulas. Time is our enemy. In Mersburg, engineers, exhausted by sleepless nights, drew a fuselage that resembled an artist's fantasy more than an actual aircraft. Hertel dreamed of a clean, streamlined silhouette, a flying wing capable of soaring even when overloaded. But time left no room for refinement. Every stroke on the blueprint meant a new risk. Would they manage to produce the parts? Would the wood withstand what calculations called the acceptable minimum? Meanwhile, things were slightly calmer at Messerschmitt, although this tranquility was illusory. Their engineers understood perfectly well that if Junkers succeeded in taking off first through some miracle, the company's reputation would collapse. Therefore, the race turned into a frenzy. People tried not to speak of it out loud, but every evening the same question hung in the workshops. Who would be the first to lift into the sky what no one had ever built? As the blueprints multiplied and warehouses filled with raw materials, the atmosphere resembled a theater on the verge of catastrophe. Political pressure grew, Göring demanded reports, threats poured in from the ministry, and every new day stole the last remnants of common sense. But there was something more than just competition in this race. It was a cult of speed, a belief that Germany was capable of defeating even time. And when Hertel, tired with a sunken face, finally signed the first blueprints for the Ju 322, he understood there was no turning back. The lines on the paper already meant metal, work shifts, assembly, and reports. War demanded not words, but bodies. And even if those bodies were made of wood, they would still be forced to fly. To draw meant to have already built. At the Junkers factory, it was not production that began, but a battle against common sense. Engineers accustomed to metal were now cutting, planing, and gluing wood. They were ordered to build an airplane out of what usually serves as firewood. Experience was nil, materials questionable. The glue was new, poorly tested, and cracked quickly. But on paper, everything looked brilliant. Light construction, cheap materials, fast production. Only no one asked if wood could withstand the weight of 20 tons. The first samples of the spars, the wing's main supporting beams, broke right during testing. One snapped in half at half the calculated load. Another bent as if it were made of rubber. The reason was quickly discovered. In their haste, they used rotten wood and glue that disintegrated at the slightest humidity. Hertel silently turned the fragments in his hands, realizing that this was not a failure, but a sentence. But the order from above was clear. Continue. Retreat was equated with sabotage, and in 1941, sabotage in Germany was not rewarded. Meanwhile, things were different at Messerschmitt. Their Mi 321, the future giant, was assembled from metal tubes, covered with fabric. This was more reliable, but also heavier. Every part required hundreds of man-hours. Every mistake increased the mass. The designers understood that a steel frame would provide stability, but it would deprive the glider of its main attribute, the ability to take off with cargo. The race was becoming a paradox. One built too light, the other too heavy. In both cases, the outcome threatened to be the same. Meanwhile, around-the-clock assembly took place in the Junkers workshops. Workers cut parts by eye. Glue seams dried in cold hangars, and engineers double-checked calculations, already knowing they wouldn't help. But every day brought new directives. Increase production volume. Prepare a batch of 100 machines. Wooden colossuses rose on the airfield, not yet flying, but already consuming energy, materials, and nerves. By November 1940, the Ju 322, first nicknamed Goliath and then the more resonant Mammoth, stood on the testing field, provoking both admiration and fear. Its wingspan was 62 meters, wider than any aircraft of that time. Inside, a spacious cargo bay designed for a tank or 100 soldiers. The wing was multi-spar, heavy, with a tiny pilot's cockpit shifted to the left, as if symmetry were a luxury. There were gun emplacements at the edges and auxiliary wheels underneath, so this monster wouldn't bury itself in the ground upon landing. It all looked like an attempt to make a flying shed behave like an airplane. The tail was too small, and even on the ground, it was clear the machine was unstable. The chief inspector of the Luftwaffe came to Mersburg and said outright, "If this thing flies, I'll eat my uniform." No one laughed. Everyone understood he was probably right. A special dolly made of steel tubes was designed for the Mammoth, 8 tons of pure weight. The glider was supposed to rest on it and be jettisoned during takeoff, continuing the flight on skis installed at the center plane edges. In theory, everything looked smooth. In practice, a catastrophe. The first tests of the dolly showed that the tug ripped the glider off it before it gained the necessary speed. Everything had to be redesigned from scratch. To brake the dolly after separation, they invented parachutes, dampers, and then a drop from minimal height. Every option ended the same way. The steel monster, upon falling, bounced off the ground and often hit the glider from below. Designers were exhausted by the number of failures, but orders came faster than reports. One day, when test personnel were checking the tank loading, what everyone feared happened. A tank drove up the ramp into the Mammoth and smashed through the wooden floor, which was insufficiently reinforced. The tank fell out, leaving a hole in the floor. They reinforced the floor, but this increased the mass and reduced the payload by a ton. Then they added new reinforcements, another ton gone. Of the 20-ton design capacity, less than half remained. By March 1941, 30 unfinished gliders already stood on the airfield, some without tails, others without cockpits, others just fuselages with wings, resembling whales washed ashore. But waiting was no longer possible. The order for trials came directly from the Reich ministry. The stakes were set. And then came the day when the Mammoth was supposed to lift off. To get it to the runway, a 5-kilometer clearing had to be cut through the forest. This was not just a drive, it was a march to war against the laws of physics. The Ju-90, a huge 4-engine transport plane, was chosen as the tug. A 120-meter steel cable stretched between it and the glider. The takeoff dolly creaked, the pilots exchanged nervous words. When the tug's engines roared, the ground shook. The Mammoth reluctantly started moving, dragging tons of metal behind it. Speed increased. The dolly bounced, separated, and crashed into the ground, shattering into pieces. Debris struck the fuselage, but the glider miraculously didn't break up. It lifted off the ground, began to swing wildly in the air like a pendulum, and almost pulled the tug down with it. The Ju-90 nosed up, overloaded, as if on a death loop. At that moment, the glider pilot made a decision. He released the tow cable. The tug leveled out just a few meters from the ground, and the Mammoth, deprived of support, suddenly stopped swinging and flew smoothly, as if sensing true flight for the first time. It didn't last long, but long enough to make a soft landing just 200 meters from a searchlight battery. The pilots emerged silently. No one shouted or rejoiced. They understood the flight had happened, but there had been no actual flying. The machine flew in spite of everything, not because of it. 2 weeks later, the Mammoth was towed back. 2 tanks dragged this lifeless body across the ground as if on its final journey. Discussions about modifications began at headquarters. Increase the tail, lighten the fuselage, redesign the dolly. But after several tests, it became clear. It was useless. Too heavy, too unstable, too late. Meanwhile, Messerschmitt continued testing its giant. It wasn't perfect either, but at least it flew. The ministry made its choice. The Mammoth's place was only on the scrap heap of ideas, where ambitions turned into wood chips. A spring morning in 1941. The air over the airfield was still, heavy, as if it didn't want to witness what was happening. On the old runway, cut straight through the forest, the wooden behemoth Ju-322, the same Mammoth, was piled up. Its cargo cabin smelled of fresh resin and fear. Workers in gray overalls checked the cable one last time, the 120-meter steel sinew that was supposed to connect the Mammoth to the Ju-90 V7 tug. No one was sure the cable would hold. No one was sure of anything. The tug pilot received a short order: take off at any cost. There were also two people in the glider's cockpit, Hans Müller and his flight mechanic, silent and focused. They understood that if anything went wrong, rescue would be impossible. When the Ju-90's 4 engines roared, the air over the airfield trembled, the ground shook, the Mamet's dolly creaked under the weight of wood and metal, and everything around resembled scenes from a dream about a machine that nature itself did not want to lift into the air. The tug gained speed. The giant on the dolly first didn't move, then crawled forward as if reluctantly. Speed, 40, 60, 80 km/h. The vibration intensified, and suddenly a bang. The dolly lifted off, flew, and, falling, shattered into pieces. Debris, like shrapnel, slammed into the glider's fuselage. One piece ricocheted off the wing, another pierced a side panel. But contrary to expectations, the Ju-322 did not fall apart. It lifted into the air as if out of stubbornness. The glider began to swing. The cable tightened. The tug yanked its tail up, barely avoiding a stall. A strange pair formed in the sky. A huge aircraft straining upward, and a wooden monster swinging behind, as if tied to fate. Every jerk threatened the demise of both. The Ju-90 crew screamed over the radio, "He's pulling us down!" And the glider pilot just gripped the yoke, feeling the machine living a life of its own. The seconds stretched into eternity. At one point, the Ju-322 climbed above the tug, and the cable tautened like a string. The Ju-90 went into a steep dive. The engines screamed at their limit. The glider pilot realized that one more moment and both would crash. He pulled the lever. A click. The cable snapped. The tug, freed, sharply leveled out, flying a few meters from the ground. And the Mamet, as if sensing relief, stopped thrashing and found stability for the first time. The wooden giant glided over the field quietly, almost nobly. The sun reflected in its varnished panels, and it seemed as if fate itself had given it a chance to show what it could do. A minute later, the glider landed softly on its 2 skis near the searchlight battery. No one died, no one applauded, everyone was silent. There was neither victory nor defeat in this flight, only the sensation of something strange, unreal, as if history itself paused for a moment, allowing the impossible to happen, and then quietly closed the door. A few hours later, guards were posted around the Mamet. The landing site was sealed off. Even the nearby railway was blocked behind a screen. No one was supposed to see the failure masked as success. 2 weeks later, 2 tanks towed the glider back, slowly, as if dragging the body of a giant. Feverish meetings began in the workshops. Hurdle reported, "We will increase the tail, improve control, lighten the structure." But the engineers already knew the truth. The more they fixed, the worse it would get. New versions of the blueprints only exacerbated the catastrophe. The added reinforcements consumed the remaining payload. The Mamet lost its purpose. It could carry neither a tank, nor a gun, nor even the 100 soldiers for whom it was created. Every decision turned into a defeat, every improvement into yet another mistake. Göring was losing patience. He demanded reports, threatened inspections, but no one believed anymore that this glider would ever truly fly. The same inspector who once said he would eat his uniform if it flew came again. He stood before the Mamet, examining the fuselage, and said quietly, "I'll keep my uniform on." No one argued, no one joked anymore. Spring turned into summer when the final order came. In May 1941, the technical department officially ceased work on the Ju-322. The already assembled gliders were sent to the chopping block. The wooden fuselages were cut into pieces, piled up, and then taken to gas generator vehicles, fuel for trucks, into which 45 million Reichsmarks had been invested. No press releases, no closure reports, just silence. In the archives, the Warsaw Ost project was written off as ineffective. But those who stood next to this flying monster remembered the sound of its first takeoff not as a triumph of technology, but as the groan of a machine created not by the laws of aerodynamics, but by the command of fear. Thus ended the story of the Mamet, quietly like a dying ember. It was burned, but not erased from memory, because such projects are not just failures. They are the traces of a time when man tried to conquer the laws of nature and lost. Not because of a lack of intellect, but because of a lack of truth. Sometimes defeat is the only form of salvation.